YOLO.
YOLO.
We're actually live.
Hello and welcome to Game of Nodes, a weekly podcast on the cosmos from independent validator teams. And as you can possibly tell by the look on our faces, we're pretty tired. This is not coffee. It is for Null, I guess, because
I have coffee because it's 7:08 a.m.
It's morning in Kanga time, isn't it? Whereas it's night in Europe time, and it's apparently 1 o'clock in America time.
Yep, it's after 5 somewhere, and that somewhere is right here.
It's always. Have you ever heard the? I've been on quite a few stag do's this year because people have been getting married after the pandemic. And they had the thing that jumps to mind immediately when I see booze at, I don't know what hour of the day it is for you right now, but is 1 before 10 or 10 before 1. There you go.
I'm not sure you should be drinking before 10 a.m. Oops.
I love the way there's even a specific joke. There are 2 specific joke sound effects, but it's got to be the
I don't think that was me. Was that me?
So funny you don't even know it.
I don't even know.
So yeah, I mean, there's mercifully, I was gonna say there's mercifully little drama to talk about this week. But I guess there was one thing I suppose that's happened in the last week that maybe, I don't know if you want to talk about any of the Juno Growth Fund stuff. It's very Juno specific though, but I guess we do kind of cover quite a bit of Juno stuff, and it was quite a lot of loud noise. Although I don't know, I've been so busy this week that literally I was working and I saw that there was like some noise, and then by the time I stopped working and was like, what's this drama? The drama was already over. So it must have been a bit of a storm in a teacup, is my feeling on that one.
Can you break it? I don't even know what you guys are talking about. What was that all about?
So these both happened in the last week, right? There was Juno Growth Fund, which is the description was basically, so Juno Growth Fund and Loop were the 2 things that happened. The Loop one is the one that literally was over before I noticed, thanks to working on Aptos for like the last 72 hours without sleeping. But the Juno Growth Fund is more interesting. That was the one to basically withdraw some of the Prop 14 rewards from Juno swap pools in order to fund a VC-like fund for Juno to incentivize new projects. Basically, it's the continuation of the Terra Developer Fund, but not for just Terra projects.
Okay.
And yeah, what's interesting about that is, like, I mean, so I think all of us have kind of sort of bootstrapped ourselves into this space. Like, we kind of ended up here a bit accidentally, and we've kind of funded ourselves until we could make some money and stuff. So I guess like I have elements of skepticism about the VC model being a healthy one, but also I guess recognize that there are some projects that need more investment up front, that need larger teams to get stuff done and all that kind of thing. And so, you know, it kind of seems like an obvious good move, even if it's not really like the way that I roll, you know.
Do you think the teams lose the hustle by doing that? Do you reckon, like, you know, they don't have the grind, they haven't done the tough yards, they don't, you know what I mean? Like, they haven't lived in a caravan and
haven't lived in a caravan and shat in a pot
and eaten baked beans for like 7 months while they're trying to get their thing off the ground. That's right. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, but, I mean,
but paid devs all straight up as well. Like, you know, I'm hiring a team, we're going to build a thing. Everyone can do that, right?
I mean, I guess this is like a cultural difference as well between a lot of the Terra projects and like the stuff that more organically happened on Juno. Is like a lot of the stuff that more organically happened on Juno, and maybe in the wider cosmos, like people had to kind of, generally speaking, get their thing running and work out how it could make money as part of getting it off the ground. Whereas a lot, I think maybe if you don't do your funding, if you get funded ahead of time, you're maybe disincentivized to work out what your funding model is. And that's how we end up with advertising, right? In Web 2, which is like incredibly toxic and corrosive as as a funding source. So,
but I think the VC piece is healthy because there's the part that is healthy about that is when the numbers are realistic, VCs also look at who the team is, what that track record is. They have enough experience to see if the idea makes sense or it's just a bunch of bullshit, right? The community does not have that experience. So anything that sounds good, like, oh yeah, and you don't, necessarily you don't know who the team is behind that. You don't know if it's a real structure around it. They have the devs to do it, where it's just, I'm just throwing cash at an idea, and the idea might be good, but it doesn't mean that idea is going to come to light, right?
So
the
what
outside
you're
of that,
saying is it's like there's no due diligence. It's just fucking, yeah, that sounds good.
I mean,
Like-
that's the thing. Like that's why everybody votes yes on most proposals, is because we want things to go right. We got the rocket emoji going like fucking crazy. So as long as they use the rocket emoji,
they want to see development. They want to see stuff on the
So-
chain, but they don't care about looking at what it is or
let's just throw money at everything, right? And we talked about this. I think we talked about this back in. I don't remember what it was, but we talked about this, I think, relation to, was it Cosmoverse? And somebody, like, all the props coming forward to, like, hey, I want $25,000 to put banners up at Cosmoverse. And we're like, what the fuck is that? Like, where's like a real marketing budget? Like, show me how you're going to use that, right? I think the same thing is true here.
$25,000 per chain.
Right, per chain, right? Making the rounds, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and the one after the other is not even all at the same time. Like, that seemed a little bit, shady. Well, not shady. It didn't seem like the right way to do it. Like, I feel like the right way to do it would have been to say, okay, we're going to ask for funding from 7 different chains or whatever the number is, all at the same time, rather than like one after the other. Oh, there's another co-sponsor. Oh, another co-sponsor. Right. Like, I feel like it was a little bit disingenuous as to what you were getting. Like, it's like, oh, is there 2 co-sponsors or is there 14? Like,
right.
Yeah, no. So not harping on about that and going back to it, it's a good event. Value for money is, I don't know. I don't know the outcomes. I haven't had like any, feedback or analysis of like what the outcomes have been for the chains, but it seems expensive for the amount of people that attend it, considering they also buy tickets. And it just seems like it wasn't gone about the right way. But hopefully there are some lessons learned. And these guys are new as well. They've only done 1 or 2 events. So they're new to the event game. But hopefully in the, next year, they've learned some lessons from this year and maybe do it better, I hope. It'd be nice.
Right.
Yeah.
So back to the VC question, though. I think you set up point out something like, I guess, interesting, which is the question, like, who's doing the due diligence, which I think, like, obviously I kind of think that the Juno Growth Fund's a good idea, like, kind of behind that. But like the question of like who is qualified to do due diligence, I guess it's that thing of like, there's a community pool there, which is just anybody can put up a prop and ask for money from the community pool.
Sure.
But the danger of that basically is that the community, well, it's not so much the community is malicious towards the community fund, kind of the opposite. You get very few props related to the community fund, which is interesting, I think. But also the community maybe is not the best place to do due diligence or communicate around due diligence. But so this is effectively sort of taking a portion of that responsibility out into effectively a multi-sig, right?
Yeah.
But I guess the question is like, how a lot of this like kind of comes down to, okay, so who is qualified to do due diligence? Number one. 2, those people probably aren't in the Juno organization already, insofar as there is any organization, even if it is very scratchy and it's multiple Telegram groups and all this other sort of stuff. But like a lot of this to me comes down to like Juno in reality, like the core team is quite small,
right?
And it's just like every other startup I've worked for, albeit a different level of chaos because of all the anons and different Telegram groups and different people working independently on stuff. But the problem here is still one of scaling a small team. Like that's the fundamental problem. Is to do VC type stuff, we need due diligence and those sorts of skills, and we need to scale a team. or Juno needs to scale a team.
Yeah.
And that's like really hard. That's like literally why all organizations die or like small teams or startups or whatever. They fail because they find it hard to actually like work together when they have to go beyond one or two people that kicked off the whole thing, who implicitly trust each other because they shipped the first thing. So yeah, it's that kind of growing pain that I'm not so sure about, I guess. Like the rest of it, I think it's a bit of a no-brainer.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not trying to. I just asked about what the heck the DAO was, so I'm not obviously I have no opinion on it. But the idea, I like the idea, and it'd be good. I think there's the one thing that I would say in some of these types of things is I don't know if I see a lot of accountability, meaning like after those things go forward and after that decision is made, does anybody actually stop and look back and say, hey, was this money well spent, or other types of things, and like use that knowledge going forward? It's very much a point in time where an organization that's kind of built around that would have a portfolio and they'd be measured on the performance of that portfolio, right?
Yeah.
Meaning like, do we make the good investments, and are we have the right people in these roles to make those good investments? And so if that DAO does do that, meaning like we have some ability to do some due diligence, and we have the ability to look backwards and say, this was smart or this was bad, or why do we choose this, and like actually build a repeatable process that can get better over time, then hell yeah. Right.
I think it would be nice if the DAOs would post like a long form report of what's happened and what's not what's worked, what hasn't worked.
Right.
Like a quarterly review.
Yeah. And maybe there's a service that's going live very soon that allows DAOs and multisigs to natively post as if they were on a social network. Maybe there is a thing. Maybe there's a thing.
I mean, maybe someone will finally finish that thing that they've been talking about for months and months.
Maybe it's already finished, but the hard part is getting legal sign off and all that crap.
I feel like this project hasn't even really been doing anything. Callum who?
Yeah, no, it's not all the work, but scaling stuff is hard, I guess. And actually, the question is this actually. So I think I facetiously called this like the Burnout cast or something like that, because we're all pretty shattered. But I think so I was thinking about this in the context of so that there's a couple of things. Like there's the Juno Growth Fund, which is going to get funded somehow, which the relation to that was reducing the incentives that were applied to some of the Juno swap pools was a potential way of getting some initial funding into it. And then, so, there's a scaling problem, which is scaling Juno's ability to do the funding. Yeah. Interestingly, it touches on Juno Swap, who are having a scaling problem, I think, of their own at the moment in terms of team. And then I think we're all really, really tired over here in validator land. And I think a lot of our validators, a lot of us are basically doing the work of several people. And so there's also, it kind of seems like burnout and scaling being hard are like these two problems. I'm just the last 2 weeks, that's all I've seen. Every team, every problem has eventually devolved down to there aren't enough people, or we don't have the right people, or we don't know how to get them right now, or whatever. Like, it feels like that is a really common problem. And that's like underlying both the tension in that prop, or that Commonwealth discussion, and the funding itself has a question of how do we scale that organizational tool. And the reason all of us have bags under our eyes is because we run validator operations that we've not scaled yet.
Right.
So what's with that? So what you're saying, the fundamental problem is that there's just not enough people in the ecosystem, particularly around developers. Everybody's looking for Go developers to work on the SDK in their own projects, and there is just no one. And I mean, even Juno's looking for people. We know a bunch of testnets looking for people. You see, Callum. Someone mentioned Callum. So yeah, I mean, you guys are probably once you launch, you're probably going to be needing people. I'm looking through Discord just here, and I know there is a number of these projects that are trying to find extra people. And what that means is that people who are already working on projects are out of necessity to help these other projects, like going across and lending a hand there as well. And then they're becoming more stretched, and then they just get tired and overworked, and then non-productive and shit the bed and have to have 2 weeks off and disappear and don't talk to anyone on Discord or anything. Like they don't actually have friends or anything. Like,
are you referencing anybody in this call right now? I don't understand.
Make everyone else feel lonely because they just disappear and don't talk to anybody or anything.
For the record, I took literally 5 days off, and then I had to work for 2 weeks, like 12 hours a day, to have everything squared away that I could take 5 days off. I still had to work a morning in those 5 days off, and then I've been working 12-hour days since I got back.
I mean, I haven't seen much shit posting from Callum either. I mean, that's been disappointing.
Yeah, I think Callum's been he got very, very burnt out, not from the rust, but from the shit posting. Like it took, I think, quite a toll on him, keeping up that cadence of shit posting.
I mean,
I think
it is quite mentally taxing doing that one-liner a day, and then a couple of like witty comments. I mean, I can see how that works. Yeah,
there's a lot of work you don't see, Noel. It's a lot of work you don't see. Like it's the torture, like the anguish that goes into that moment of inspiration. Do you ever watch that old British like animated thing called Monkey Dust? Like really dark black comedy for like
British animated things.
It's like a really dark like thing that only ran for a couple of seasons. I think the creator died like really young, and that's why it didn't, whatever. And you can get like a DVD of the first series. I think that's literally it. You can find some bits on YouTube. But there's this thing about, those like really shit catchphrases you see like big businesses have where they're like, get inspired or something. There's this whole sketch about how it's just
Let's get generic.
We need a new slogan. And there's like a bunch of people in the boardroom. It's like, God damn it, Renshaw, we need a new slogan. I don't care how it's done. And then they go like, well, I'll get our top man on it. And it basically has this guy like goes out into the wilderness and then like disappears for several years. And there's like him getting like mugged in the desert and then like beaten by a gang of men and stuff like this. And then like, he's like years later, he's got this long beard. He's like, God, why have you forsaken me? And then like, it shows him coming back into the boardroom and he's just like, yeah, the new slogan is ignite for the future or something like that. And like the punchline's always shit. But like he's suffered so much for the crap, and there's like a series of these. There's like one where they need a new car name, and he goes and like, he goes on like a spirit journey, and then ends up in like a German sex dungeon, getting like just having like gang sex. And then while he's having, this is a very dark and quite explicit cartoon, I should say. It was on very late at night, and then there's like he's basically getting beat, like I think like for sexual gratification, like getting beaten by a gimp or something. And he just goes, Nissan Terrano. And then the next thing you see is they're back in the boardroom going, excellent. And they're like unveiling the Nissan Terrano. It's like something like that. They have one where they're trying to work out a new name for cancer. Like, is all these, but the long line is like, there's always a shit result, but he always suffers so much for it. And I feel like that sketch is kind of like Callum shit posting.
I just added,
except maybe without all the sexual explicitness. But I mean, he did dial into this from a bed, so what are you gonna
always
could be bed knobs and broomsticks though. That's a relevant thing. God, I'm sorry to the listeners. I really need to emphasize that I was up till like 3:30 this morning working on bringing up some new validator stuff. So it's been a very long few days.
In Terraform, right? Wow.
Yeah. Well, so I've been going on a bit of a spree anyway on all of our Cosmos stuff with automating everything with Ansible.
Me too.
So yeah, because so Polkachu, friend of the podcast, legend, has a bunch of Terraform Ansible stuff for their operations, and so I've been basically adapting some of that, changing some of it, write some new bits for the way we set up our servers.
Copy paste. It's going to have like a bunch of new services come up on Polkachu.com.
Yeah, straight up forked. But yeah, so we're basically we're looking at Aptos, which is obviously outside of Cosmos, so I don't want to talk about it too much. But They provide a bunch of Terraform and stuff as a template to work with, and since we're AWS anyway, generally, that's actually quite a good fit for us doing something that's very repeatable for a new engineer who's not me, who doesn't want to like log on to a box and go, this has all been configured from the mind of one very tired person. Like if the foundation has a recommendation for how the services should be set up, I'm happy to use that as a template and, you know, just add the additional layers of automation and stuff on top that we'd use. So, but yes.
Cool.
Yeah. Though it's going to be really expensive.
If anybody wants, like, you know, to know how to do it the manual way, we did a podcast last week, which I'm sure neither of you have watched.
I joined. I was busy. I was at a show, which was miserable. We'll talk a different story, but I was at a show with my kids and my wife. It was miserable. So I just logged in. I didn't listen to you and I just shit posted and then left. So I think that was, it seemed good. It went 2.5 hours. So it's interesting that when you're on the podcast with us and we start talking after minute 90, you start hitting the button. But if we're not there and it's just you, then you can run for 2 hours and 20 minutes and it's totally cool.
The 90-minute mandate is from the fray. I would talk for 3 fucking hours.
But so Schultze did not have admin rights to cut you off, right? So
he tried. He was like,
he tried. That's why he's not here today, is because he had enough last week.
Yeah, exactly.
He had enough last
He's already done 2 weeks of shows with one. He's like, I've done my time, lads. I've done my time.
That's right. Yeah. He's like, I did 2 weeks. Okay. So I see how it goes. So when we talk after minute 90, you got a finger on the button. But if we're not here and you're on your own, fucking
So
I got rugged the 2 weeks before my week off. I was the one that got rugged after minute 90. So, you know, just saying.
I asked the chat several times. I said, do you want me to hurry up? The thing with having no people in a chat is that no one can tell you to fucking hurry up.
to fuck off.
Because they all left after 90 minutes. Like,
we have had a comment related to just that bit we were talking about before we just started talking about how burned out we are, basically, and how burnt out Callum is, and then Monkey Dust, because I'm really good at a tangent. Ben Davis has said, I'll throw up the screen, this is related to the growth fund stuff. I think a better approach would be for the chain to pass a brief for a sub DAO, and then people could apply to be part of the sub DAO, and then, you know, and then the reports would allow people to reapply or step aside.
Yeah.
So that's actually that's probably not a bad shout, actually, in terms of, like, you know, crowdsourcing some of that wisdom in terms of bringing on additional people. I think for something like non-technical skills, that's, as in really specifically non-engineering skills, that's probably a pretty good shout, actually. I guess it's the.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I cut you up. Go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, like, because obviously you can do a lot if you don't properly vet an engineer. They've got access to your source code. You know, if you actually allowed them access to the repo, they could, I guess, potentially do more damage. Like, but then they could just like fork your code, submit a PR with a bug or a vulnerability, and if you miss it, so maybe it's the same. It's the same risk. It's just trust, isn't it?
Well, I think it in that sub DAO area, if you have a small team that's available to do that, then you could pick a start and end date, and then you could stop it and you can measure the performance, and you could say we want to be able to do elections on those members or something else, right? Like you can get to a more of a structure. It becomes more like a board, right? You have a board associated to a VC that has performance metrics and goals, and then whatever. I think, I mean, this is all stuff that will come as the numbers increase and as there's more failures, I think, in terms of funding and everything else. Right now, it seems like there's so many tokens available that you can just kind of throw shit at whatever, and nobody's going, oh wow, you know, there's a real problem here. It's too early for that, but after a couple of years, I'm sure those processes will come in just because it has to.
But at the same time, I was having a conversation with some of the Juno Swap guys earlier, where they were talking about you know, the trouble of scaling in terms of hiring, and I was sort of saying, well, you know, would you rather be in the position in a few years where you've got, you know, maybe other services have overtaken you, or it's clear that you've run to the end of your course and you've still got, you know, zillions of tokens, or would you rather be in the position where you still fucked it, but there's nothing in the bank. You gave it your best shot. The community, everybody who is invested in your success looks at what you've done and they go, well, didn't pan out the way we all thought, the way we all hoped, but really did give it the best run, spent money where it was necessary. Like it's that thing of like, there's two things here. There's like the effort of everybody involved, and then there's the tokens or the money or whatever.
Right.
Like you don't want to end up in a position where you fail with leftover energy and leftover money, do you?
Sure. Yeah. No, it's totally right. Right. And the other part of it is like we were talking about other chains or everything else. The other part of it is too much cash. Like when you have too much cash, that was what I think Noah was talking about before. Is like you want enough cash to actually pay people to eat. Like obviously that's there. Like we've talked to you were talking about different chains
but
that are
not
starting
full.
that have received.
People got to be hungry.
A little bit hungry, but not fat, right? But the other thing is like right now you have A16Z, or you have the other ones that are throwing hundreds or 200 or 300 million dollars at small teams, and honestly they have the same issue. They can't find the people, right? And so what that turns into is an overstressed engineering team and a massive marketing team, right? And that's not necessarily anything good either, right? And honestly, and a lot of those things we were talking about before, the Cosmos is in a better situation with that. Was it on? I don't know if it was this or somewhere else where we talked about. Actually, it was on Twitter. I was talking about somebody was making fun of the marketing of a different chain, and I hopped in to say like Cosmos marketing is awful. Like this is a great technology chain that I think is under marketed, and I think for the most part there's a lot of engineers saying, oh, it's going to work out, and best technology does not work out. Like that's not the way that life works.
Betamax. Wait.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a ton of those stories, right? And best technology does not a guaranteed winner. Even with IBC and everything else, like you have to have the right mix of both the technology and the emotional side of it. And if it's not available and you don't have the right marketing and you don't have the right visibility, it could be fucking awesome. It's still gonna die. So especially in this space, right?
I actually wrote my original dissertation on a version of that, which is basically about how essentially academic theory and there were a bunch of people in the early 20th century who wrote about how academic theorists understated how change and especially revolution actually happens, and how emotional a trigger it is and how irrational it can be, but also how understated the impact of violence is, and how this was the bit that I kind of wrote about, was like how people's reaction to that is highly based on like, it's not like some like rational worldview of like, here are the values I'll accept and here are the values I won't accept. It's like, actually there are some things people will fight for, like physically, apply violence and go, yeah, no, I'm actually fine with that, and all this sort of stuff. And how essentially people who have a really deep technical understanding and spend a lot of time thinking about a thing, whether that's social change, whether that's socialist revolution, whether that's Cosmos, whether it's IBC, tend to misunderstand the way that people outside of that sphere are brought into the understanding and emotional engagement with the thing that they want to see come to pass,
Right. Yeah. And I think somebody just said, hobby holder, hey, welcome, said the market is network effects, and it is to a point. And I agree with somebody else mentioned here around it could be effect, but there has to be a broader audience to be able to see it, or it won't do much. I agree with that too. Like network effect has a piece of it, something else, but there has to be more of that. Like there has to be a greater visibility to it. And we talked a lot about this, we've talked a lot about UI and like, the lowering the barriers to entry and understanding and clarity and those types of things. And honestly, it'll grow with the maturity of different types of solutions like liquid stake and other types of areas where I feel like that you don't have to understand the details of lockups, and you're not understanding, like there's a lot of things that you can kind of, even though it's more complicated from a technical perspective, the actual ability for a human to understand what the hell's going on, I think somewhat, makes it a little bit easier. But so anyway, I don't know how we get on this topic. I don't know where we came from this, but
well, I think we've been talking. I guess we've been talking about funding and growth, haven't we? So, but and the other interesting thing as well, like you were saying, Giuseppe, where I think you were probably almost directly referencing SWE, however you pronounce it, and Aptos, which is these teams that are given a lot of money and then have to scale. Which I mean, to be fair, I could also describe a bunch of teams in Cosmos too.
Yeah.
Sure. is that like some apologies to, well, actually, to be fair, I wouldn't dox them on the podcast anyway, but a colleague of mine who's sadly, I've forgotten which one, a former colleague of mine said that in their experience, every time a team scales by a factor of 2, everything falls apart. Like whether that's from 1 person to 2, whether it's from 2 people to 4, everything falls apart, and like you have to completely restructure the way that you work together. And like I guess that kind of makes sense. Like if you just, like I saw this with the name service, like when it's just 1 person, you're just like twiddling away on your own, and then you bring in other people to try and build something more significant. It's like, okay, well, like, so the way with like Callum and Weaver, who are the other 2 primary devs on HAL, like Weaver does a lot of the front end, but also does quite a bit of the back end, to be fair. Callum does the lion's share of the rest of the back end. And actually, like, I haven't done as much code. I've been doing a lot of the organization and the legals and the, like, all the setup and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, sure. But it's that thing of like, you can't assume that your role is going to stay static either, or like how a team dynamic works out is always like, it's very, very, very hard to work with other people. It's very, very hard to bring people in and be okay with how the dynamic works out and what that will mean you have to do as well.
Yeah.
You know, because I'd rather be coding, but it's not, over and over again. Like, everything I do, I always end up getting pushed into organization and management. And that's the other thing. Like you'll see with core teams, with founders, like I've worked for 2 or 3 startups where like, I just spent years working there telling the CTO to stop just trying to skive off and code and actually manage the team and set a roadmap. And like, I understand it. If I was in the situation, I'd find it very frustrating too, but it's, I don't know. I'm not, it's just like scaling is super, super hard. And I think like, even if we had the engineers just knocking around, which we demonstrably don't,
right,
we'd still have all that. We'd still then have a second problem to deal with. So we've got like this huge problem actually bringing people in, and then we've got like this second problem waiting, which is then how we actually build effective. I don't know. It's an interesting one. Like you wonder whether there's a good way past it. And I think also back to even just like our little teams here, like the majority of Game of Nodes plus Game of Nodes friends of the show, we're all like 1 person with freelancers, or 1 person with maybe 1 other person helping, or at the most 2 people, right? Almost all the validator operations. Like Usurper, Rhino's 2, right?
2. Yep.
I think you might be the outlier. I think you're overstaffed compared to the rest of us.
Well, I think the other piece of that is, not to relate, our issues are quite easy because we're primarily infrastructure type security. So it's pretty along the lines of what we have. But in your piece, like going back to Hal and with Callum, and I'm sorry, I forgot, what was the other name that you mentioned?
Weaver.
So that type of thing, I could totally understand how that doubling piece comes in. And also with the other thing I think is interesting here is the speed of this market. Like in a Web 2 world, if you 3 were building Howl, there's no expectations. There's no kind of like timeline around it and everything else. And then here, you guys you open up a public beta and it's instantly, around when's the drop happening and what's the airdrop and this and that and when's this coming due. Like the expectations I think are much higher, honestly, in crypto, and especially in the Juno chain too, because there's so many projects that are going on. So that means you guys have to gel faster and you have to determine roles faster, and like, I don't know, it's a lot of outside pressure that I think maybe doesn't exist when if you guys were just building this in a vacuum in a database, you could take as long as you wanted, right? There's no big pressure here. But here in this, it's very much more visible, I think, project infrastructure. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but it sure seems like it kind of working in both worlds. It seems like there's a lot more like expectation, or at least the expectation's higher. And like, you go into Howl in the beta and something doesn't work and everybody's up your ass because something's broken or something else.
It's a blessing and a curse, isn't it? Because I've equally worked on things in the past where we were killed for 1,000 users, right? And literally killed for 1,000 users who told us what features they wanted. Those companies were spending money on people to go out and talk to prospective users or do surveys, and and actually, again, this was a conversation I was having with some of the Junoswap guys literally the other day. Was like in crypto, you have these people who will tell you straight to your face, I love your project, but I hate that I don't have X and Y and Z. Like, and that feels like that probably feels pretty bad if you have like thin skin. I know sometimes it gets on my tits as well, to be perfectly honest, like when people are very, very forthright, but then you take a step back and you go like, this is kind of awesome. Like, it's better that people care about it than not
For sure.
care at all.
Right. But not too much.
Yeah, not too much. But maybe that's the benefit of maybe the validator thing. I think the validator thing, until something like Prop 16 happens, you're quite invisible, but you're just kind of running at this constant high level of anxiety.
Right.
But it's quite hidden until suddenly you're in the limelight and people are sort of like have a very active opinion on what you do, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe that's where it's a bit different to, like, you know, being an application developer in the space, let's say, or building a chain, where building a chain probably is the most visible you could be, I guess.
I think that adds to your burnout too, right? Because all that you just talked about adds stress, and it adds time, and it adds thought, right? And this is the burnout episode. I'm trying to bring it back, but I think that all adds to a piece of that expectation creates, you know, it creates weight, right, on the shoulders. Would you agree or no?
Yeah.
Or
I guess I think it's more, you know what? I think it's more the I think it's more the when you have people, the flip side of the coin is that, yeah, the weight of expectation means you have a lot of things to think about, and each one of them means that if you focus on any of those things too much,
yes, you're
going to then lose focus and not do one thing well. And I think, like, it depends, I guess, how you like to accomplish tasks. But I think a lot of technical minded people like to do a thing and do it well, and then move on and be comfortable that they can sleep at night about that thing. And I think that everybody has a sliding scale of perfectionism, but, like, especially in infrastructure, that's kind of the way I feel about stuff. And, like, you know, you were talking about all the chain launches and stuff earlier, and Noel was talking about all of the test nets that are running and stuff at the moment.
Yeah.
And that's one of those where literally it's not quite a panic attack, but because I don't think I have an anxiety disorder, but I can feel like this, like, you know, like the high pitched whine, and I was like, this is what people who have anxiety, this would probably be like a trigger or something for that.
Yeah.
All those things, you're like, that's a lot of things to think about. That makes me feel tired thinking about it.
And that's
so,
go ahead.
No. Well, no. Well, I was just going to say, like, in terms of, it's the workload. Like, there is so much going on. One person just doesn't have enough bandwidth to stay over everything. So, I mean, you're sort of forced to be what is the most interesting to you, etc. Like, I think talking about team sizes and you know, that type of stuff, I think if King Nodes were going to get more people, then we would probably not even look for a technical person, and probably more someone like a marketing person, as well as probably I would like to have an analyst to evaluate chains instead of a technical person, someone who can go through and evaluate whether or not they're, like, worthwhile software, or whether they're just another shit chain or something like that. So I think technically wise, like, you know, I'm the main technical guy. There's enough capacity just in myself to take care of what we're on, because we don't join every chain.
Right.
But I also do everything manually. I don't really use automation for booting up nodes and stuff like that, because they can be done quite quickly anyway. So yeah, I mean, I think you just have to want to, but you need to bring your scope of work down so that you're not burning yourself out to the things that you're the best at. I mean, it's a little bit harder for you, the Frey, because you're working on multiple projects, and you are two things. You're a coder and you're a node operator. So those two things is not like there's a little bit of crossover there, but mainly, like, when you're working on HAL, you're working on something that's completely different to your validator business, and it's really got to divide your attention, you know what I mean? And you've only got so much bandwidth for different things in your head.
Well, technically, I spend more time on Juno really than HAL most of the time.
well, that's another project as well. So you're like a main developer in Juno. But like I think of things. So one thing that I think of, like in terms of your available bandwidth, right? In your head, I'm talking about, not on the internet. So here's an example, right? Like when you don't have a lot of money, okay, you think about different things than someone who has more money, and you've only got so much space in your head. An example of this is like, say you're shopping, right? You're walking down the aisle, you're like earning minimum wage, and you're got a couple of kids in tow. You might be a single mother or whatever, right? So you might be doing it a bit pretty tough. And what you're thinking about when you're walking down that aisle is like you're adding things up in your head or on a calculator, where you're picking things off the shelf and you're putting it in your cart, and you're very concerned with when you get to the end of your shop, like if you can afford to pay for all those things that are in your cart, right? Take someone who's like a middle income or even a higher income earner, walking, a couple of kids, same situation, but just at a higher income level, right? And more secure in their financial position. They're walking down the cart. They're just picking stuff off the shelf they like and they think they might want to eat, right? They're just picking it off and chucking it in. Meanwhile, in their head, they're not thinking, they're not adding up prices. They're thinking about, work tomorrow. Like, what have I got to tell Jane to do? Different things. And it's more available bandwidth for them to be able to put towards their activities of like earning money or family or relationships or anything else, right? They're thinking about different stuff, and they're being able to apply that elsewhere, right? So for us, like when you have multiple things going on, that's different places you have to allocate your like internal bandwidth. So, is that necessarily a bad thing? I guess it depends on how good you are at those things, like how ingrained they are in you. Like if doing something is easy for you, then maybe it doesn't use a lot of bandwidth. If doing something is difficult or new, then that uses a lot of thought and bandwidth, right? Or if you're under pressure on that side of things, then you're applying a lot of bandwidth to that, and then the other things in your life suffer because you can't apply your thinking to those other things. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, I actually agree with you a lot on that entire assessment. There is a I believe a considerable body of work that shows that people who are time poor are stressed out by the fact they have so little time, and they make poor decisions about time management. And people who are have a lower income, or who are financially poorer, also can make the wrong decisions about money when they're stressed out, just like fully focused on that situation, because there's only so, when you're already at like the burnout point, you start making bad calls basically. So there is like a bandwidth thing built into the way we think about problem space. That's our primary like preoccupation, if you like.
So I guess to that end, like I manage my time based on priority, right? So there's a list of stuff that gets added to all the time, and it's ranked by priority or the highest yield to me in my life, or the success factors, right? So if applying my time to this particular thing is going to increase the success of that thing, then that's what gets my time if it ranks higher than the other things on the list. So, if there's,
that sounds like what's that awful hedge fund guy, if it isn't making me money, I drop it.
well, it's sad but true, right? You're not gonna, you have to apply yourself to the most to the best yield. Like you wouldn't, if you're investing, you wouldn't pick the thing that's got the worst outcome possibility and invest all your money in it, would you? Because it just isn't worth it. So you would you would invest in the thing that's potentially got a high growth possibility, newer thing. Like, you know, you wouldn't be investing your money in, like, I don't know, inflatable.
I know what
Not
you're going to say as well.
What? What
like
inflatable what?
you wouldn't be investing your money in flammable diapers, right?
Oh, flammable. I think you said inflatables. Inflatables
did
was going
Started
nowhere,
with inflatable.
nowhere good. Okay.
I had to think of something else.
That's not exact. That's not true though, because like the three of us sit on Discord and talk shit about Cosmos validation and other types of things, and that's not. There's no ROI in that. Actually, there is an ROI in that.
But it is time boxed as well. Like, I don't know about you, but I open Discord
Is
for
it?
5 to 10 minutes at a time while I'm making a coffee, and then I close it.
Get
And
the fuck out of here.
Closed
you
for
do.
several hours.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
I've noticed.
I have Telegram.
This thing
muted
is on
all my devices.
24/7. I get beeped in the middle of the night. It's ridiculous. It's literally turned into it's IRC for 2022, but it's exactly the same because I want to know what's going on. And also the other thing with that is that the FOMO piece of it, which is we were talking about before, the fear of missing out piece of it, is that in this space when something drops, like, hey, there's a test net coming or there's a validator form or something else, literally 10 minutes can make the difference. Right. And that's a miserable life because there's some things that, like, we've gotten into certain situations where it's just been lucky because we've at the right place at the right time. Right. And that's helped us be able to grow and not only be right. We're a good validator and we're good infrastructure and security and everything else. But yeah, there's also there's a mix of luck in this business as well. And that's tough to not be. You can't really sleep on this business, which is tough.
But also,
I mean, also just like the impact. I think the other thing is, like, you know, the impact on friends and family is pretty major. Like,
sure.
When we were doing the run up to Manita last autumn, there was a period in that final 2 test nets where I'd actually, like, had a long standing thing where I was going to see some friends that I hadn't seen for 2 years because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And it all went wrong. We crashed the test net. We had a hard deadline because the core team had said on Twitter that we were going to launch on the 15th. And just instead of seeing my friends, I was sat on their sofa working for 2 days, basically.
Sure.
And, you know, I think that is the thing as well. Like, you know, the cyber attack, I was spending some time with my dad for the first time in a while. The first one in April. And it was just like, okay, see ya, you know, whatever. So I think it's like the cumulative effect of maybe some of those things too. And I know that, like, I've talked with quite a lot of the other validators that are friends of the show and stuff. And I think all of us have a story of where something, family or holiday or something, just got taken out back behind the barn and shot in the head, you know.
But the that's part of the business, right? Yeah, you're right. Because the other part of it is that it's when that's not happening and when I'm sleeping, I'm making money. Because the blockchain's moving, right? And so when those things don't happen, you know, I've had a 30-year career in consulting, other types of things where you have to be on site and you have to be working to be able to make. And this business is not like that, where you can be able to build an income that's based off of good planning and other types of things to be able to get into that position. And the caveat to that is that every once in a while you ruin your wife's vacation. so there's hey, we're on vacation because of this business. So every once in a while I need to ruin it through a 2 a.m. You know, hey, we're not going to this show because something, right? Whatever it is, it needs to happen. So I think there's no free lunch, right?
Yeah. It is. Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. You can't. I think all of us who've worked in other areas, you know, before are kind of like, you know, we're here because we want to be, but it doesn't make it any less. Like, I think for most of us, we're coming up to about a year on most of our first main nets, right? So it's that thing when you look back and you're like, yeah, I've been like on 24 hours a day basically for a year now. You start to go, yeah, that's pretty intense.
Yeah,
but
plus, I mean, you're doing both development and operator, which is tough because some of those are technology / uptime requirements, and other ones are people requirements, where you're, you know, making sure that people are not stuck or they're not delayed because of you, or they have what they need to complete their job. And
the people yeah, you're right. The people is harder than the tech. But then, like, you know, I look at you and like Null and some of the other like folks like Whisper and Co, who are up on like 12, 13 chains. Like,
yeah,
there's only so far automation can take you when you're a team of 2 people.
I don't know. Polka Chew.
Wow.
I just dumped that. I don't think
Polka's S tier though. That's the problem. Polka's very, very good, and I'm
he is
like, I'm not.
that is automation at, I don't know what the hell what you would call that, but when I go to that website, like how many chains he has, I feel like a freaking loser.
Yeah, I yeah, I feel like whenever I look at Polka's stuff, that like Polka is living the organized, ordered life technically that I wish I was, and I'm just not there. I'm just not that guy. I just don't have that focus, that detail. I can't focus on one thing that long.
There's 32 chains on this website.
He's an exceptional infra guy, and people should delegate to him. He should be much higher in many chains.
32 chains on this website, right? Like this is the case study for Ansible. Like this is, how can I take a pretty complicated, like this is a high uptime, high stress. This is a compliment. Don't get me wrong. How do I take a business that's high uptime, high stress with downsides associated to bad uptime and use proper automation to be able to build at scale? And this is a good case study for that, right? I mean, Polka has like across the board, like great uptime and use of technology, and you have 32 chains on this list. It's crazy.
Yeah. I also think as well, like I don't know if you've read Polka's blogs on like their reasoning behind why they do things in a certain way as well. Like it's really well thought through. Like as in, like, okay, I know I always get shit and I always talk about getting shit for running on AWS, but my reasoning for running on AWS is basically like, it's what I do for an enterprise client and generally hasn't failed me.
Yeah.
That would be a very short blog post. Polka's is actually a blog post with actual technical reasoning and justifications for the decisions. And I'm like, again, this is that attention to detail and thinking it through that like, I just, I think they're an incredibly slept on validator.
Yep.
Obviously, like I say, like, you know, I'd started actually terraforming some of our stuff because that's the automation framework that I used most recently in my day job a couple of years ago.
Sure.
And then I saw that Polka had basically Ansibled everything. And I used to work with Ansible in like 2014. So I was like, fuck it, right, it's already done. It's already done. And I explicitly trust that whatever Polka has done is better structured than anything I would do. And I literally just like forked it, adapted the bits that I wanted to change, ran it, it worked. And I think I sent Polka a message, or maybe it was in a public Discord channel where I was just like, fucking hell, your Ansible is really well organized. Thank you. Because I needed to change a bunch of things where I was like, my setup's just very, like, quite different. And it was just like, it was organized enough that it was somebody, you know, it was like several thousand lines of Ansible or whatever. And I was able to just find the bit in the right places because it was well structured. It's got a README that's really short as well, but it was just well structured enough. I found the bits. I was like, this is just really good. None of my stuff is that well organized. None of my bash script folders are that well. I don't know.
For anyone listening, just to add more detail on Null's comment to delegate to Polka Chew, only if he's below the 3 of us. Otherwise, screw him and delegate to Needle Gas King Nose and Rhino and Lavender 5 and move him down the chain. Let's be honest here.
And the one time I degened on a chain on Kerberos, like I wasn't in the set, and Polka gave me Polka and Jabby both gave me a few tokens to get started. So they're just great guys. Like obviously you can't say, you know, Jabby, everybody knows Jabby's a great guy, but like Polka's such a great guy.
Yeah.
Are you still on Kerberos?
I am.
No, I wound down ages ago.
So just, you know, actually what you should do is undelegate from everybody else and just delegate to us and Poker.
Are you guys like top 3 or something?
I'm number 4.
I'm not in Kerberos. I'm talking about on every network, man.
I'm number 4 in Kerberos. I just actually moved down because friends moved up, but you know, not friends of the show.
When Kerberos launched, I thought to myself, no thanks.
my empire on Kerberos as number 4 validator equates to $1,400 USD. So there you go.
Savage.
that
Yeah.
savage.
That's
Raking it in over there. Yeah. But I hope maybe it'll turn into something. Let's see.
But there's also a thing here that when we were talking about when we were talking like validators dumping, like this is way back during like when the price was still pretty good.
Yeah.
But like you do now get to a point now where there are chains building in the bear. There's a lot of stuff going on, and like to kind of again back to the kind of keeping up with all of it. Like if you were going to be looking at hiring, looking at getting more support, looking at doing more ambitious stuff as a validator organization to take to take your business forward or to take whatever your long-term plan is, like, whether that is like us going more into the kind of application side of things or whatever direction you want to go. That just again shows how important it is to have made sure that you've got a firm position from when the market's up, because right now, like, you wouldn't be expansion, forget about it. Like, that's not happening in this market, and yet the chain launches keep coming. The noise level isn't going down, the workload isn't going down,
and that's it. And like you want to be able to participate in these chains. Like I've talked to a bunch of great startups and groups that are coming. Skip, I just talked to last night. Like, that team sounds awesome. We've had conversations with Defund. Like, they're, obviously Canto just went live a little bit ago, and then Empower talked about today. Like, you get in a situation where, like, this goes back to what we talked about before on the DAO side of the house is, like, you want to be able to do due diligence, but as an individual, you need to, how much time can you spend towards that, and how much time can you actually understand of what's there? And so I usually do team kind of reviews to see what's going on. But there's a huge FOMO piece within this. And honestly, this is just starting, right? Like, we're at the beginning of this ramp in terms of the number of chains they're going to launch and everything else. So if we're looking this tired right now, it's going to be bad in 6 months from now.
It's definitely, you can't be everywhere. You can't be everywhere. You can't be everywhere at once unless unless you're like, yeah. But also, I mean, there's different strokes for different folks, right? So there's Pokachoo does, I think it's just him, but he does everything like automated in a like you said, in a
I think the Pokachoo intern account is just Poker's alt, isn't it? It's
it's at night time.
Don't dox the guy. What are you doing?
Well, the phrase said it anyway.
So,
well, I mean, that's just my suspicion. I can't prove it, but
if you look at then Cosmo Station has a shitload of people and money, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're both on every chain. One is
some of those big validators have like 50 staff. Like, I was talking to some of those guys in where was that place that I went? Prague, that one, the thing, the Cosmos event.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was just like, just out of curiosity, how many staff do you have? Some of these guys are like 50, and I'm like, what? And then I'm like, how many engineers? And they're like, oh yeah, only about 12. And you're like heavy breathing. You're like,
yep.
So just on the automation thing, Dan from Defiant Nodes, I'm pretty sure it is. Do you know of Dan? He's doing some work with Strangelove, and I've been following along with him on Discord, and he sent me a little thing that he's been working on the other day with Strangelove, with the whole K9s or K8s Kubernetes. Yeah, so he's sent me it's in a CLI, a dashboard of, I'm pretty sure he's got automated launching everything into K8s, and it looks pretty cool, to be honest. And I want him to give me a run through, and I think he's going to give me a run through today at some point.
That's a basically extension of what's going on with the Docker structure.
Yeah, like their test suite. I think they're running K8s, running everything through Docker. So the example he sent me is for Kujira, and in here on this K8, he has got everything running automated with Cosmos Exporter, Grafana, Sentries, Node Exporter, Price Feeder, and Prometheus, all sort of automated to mesh together.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see looks quite nice. I want to see the scripts and how quick it boots up. But yeah, people are
Not quick.
definitely
That'll
going to
be
work
the
on
answer.
alternate solutions to like the automation.
Sure.
So that's cool.
And I'm trying to remember what was we've talked about before. What's a container structure that was built for originally for Akash to be able to run nodes on Akash?
Oh, so that's the Tom one, the Omnibus.
Omnibus. So it's basically an extension of Omnibus, right? You're basically just orchestrating containers for those types of things.
I mean, it could be, or it could be their own custom containers. I'm not 100% sure.
Right.
I guess it depends what they're probably. I would imagine if it'd be the same containers because they'll all just be chain by chain, so they'll just grab them off of they'll just grab them out of a known stable repository, right?
Sure.
So Kubernetes is just the to those listening who might not know what the fuck we're talking about. Docker is the virtualization environment, so you can run a thing in a Docker container, and if your system can run the Docker container, there's a high likelihood, like whatever's inside is kind of isolated from the host ish, a bit of hand waving if you can run Docker. So it's a way of like running a thing on multiple devices as if it was a binary, like just an executable program. And Kubernetes is an abstraction framework for running Docker containers. So you make a Kubernetes cluster across one or multiple machines, and then that cluster just has capacity to accept things deployed to it, network them together, and offer ingress and egress of data to them, essentially, via whatever scheme you want. So Kubernetes and Helm are two of the main. The Helm is the way you kind of define large deployments of Kubernetes stuff, generally speaking. And the connection here is that Akash Overclock did a lot of work on Kubernetes and Helm, which is where they're coming from with their software. Their SDL, their software description language, is like quite familiar, very similar to, kind of like a YAML-y version of the Terraform that you'd use. And obviously a lot of the Helm and Kubernetes stuff is YAML. So that's why the SDL looks a little bit like that. It's because Akash's team have prior in that area. And that's why providers, if you kind of wave your hand, the Akash concept of a provider is kind of like a single or multi-machine cluster, if you like. There's a lot of the same kind of concepts going on there, but like this is relevant because so the thing that we were talking about earlier, which is that the Aptos team give you the Terraform for what they consider a baseline implementation, and you can obviously change it up if you need to, but like, so we're, for this current test net, experimenting with just running straight up on AWS a Kubernetes cluster. We're using hosted Kubernetes, so we're literally using EKS. But you could equally spin up a host and then create the Kubernetes cluster and then throw part of that Terraform at the actual creation of the Docker containers in the cluster.
Right.
If you wanted. And so Tom from EcoStake, who's obviously maintainer of Omnibus, he, as I understand it, uses he uses his Docker stuff, but he basically has a host that can take the Docker containers, he can run them. I don't think it's Kubernetes that he runs on, but it's like a sliding scale from basically like, I have a host that will run Docker containers that I throw at it, all the way to I have several hosts that are essentially a Kubernetes cluster. I throw stuff at them, it gets run.
And all this is just to be able to build repeatability in terms of deliverability, so you make less mistakes, where it's very easy to make mistakes on, if you're expanding out from a bare metal perspective, or other types of things, you forget something or something similar to that, you have a playbook to be able to run, those types of things. The idea is that you're building automation to be able to continually improve that playbook, to be able to reduce mistakes and those types of things. I don't necessarily, that's really what it's about. It's not necessarily going to guarantee, for people listening, it's not going to say guarantee higher uptime or other types of things. It's really, it can in certain situations, but for the most part, it's primarily
maybe in a disaster recovery situation.
Yeah, you're right.
But
Yeah,
even in that case, like, the scale of some of these deployments, like the provisioning and deploying the Aptos stuff, you're waiting half an hour for it to provision all the stuff the first time.
Right.
So if you had to fully disaster recover that onto another cloud provider or another, or if you had to fail it over to bare metal, if you hadn't already prepared a Kubernetes cluster ready to accept a deployment, bearing in mind the fact you'd have to have separate maintained Terraform for the bit you wanted to do, which is just the deployment, which you would have had to have tested, taking time and cost, and then maintained over time, taking time and cost and energy.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, it still wouldn't be instant. And this is why there's a sliding scale for automation, right? Whereas something like what Polka's done, very, very sensible, right? Because I can spin up a really cheap Hetzner box. I can run that Ansible against it and see if it provisions a Cosmos. Well, I actually don't even have it provisioning Cosmos nodes or anything because I prefer to do that bit manually. Because we use TMKMS and I prefer to just make sure I've switched all the keys over and everything. But
Sure.
I like everything to be, I like it to install Prometheus, node exporter, all that stuff. Not turn it on, but like have it ready on the box. So that bit I can just throw up against the cheapest Hetzner box and just check it works.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah,
and to me, that's a thing that like now, I guess going forward, probably every few weeks, I'll just run it against a blank box and then throw the box away just to check it's ready to go.
And honestly, there's a downside to this too. We just talked about, I don't know if it happened, I think last week, maybe when Null and Schultze were talking for 6 hours on this podcast, but Blockdaemon double signed on Evmos. Is that what it was? Was it Evmos? I forget where they double signed.
Yeah, there's two that double signed Evmos.
Well, they white label somebody else, right? So they were. I think the understanding was that they're heavily automated, right? Like Blockdaemon, huge validator, like back to your 50-person type of thing, right? The downside of automation sometimes is in the wrong hands or with forgetting what exactly that does or kind of understanding the scope of that automation. You can get into situations where you make massive mistakes because you're letting scripts run and do things that what Frey was just talking about is, he's stopping to think about what the role of TMKMS is in that situation to make sure that I have, this type of structure where I'm not going to double sign, blah, 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 right? He understands the blockchain. And they just double signed on both their node as well as a white label node because they were running automations. And so there's double, I guess there's two sides of that sword, right?
I think when you're talking about signing, like you either have to have robust built-in, checking in your scripts, or you need to just do it manually. Because I think the only safe way to do it is just to do it manually. No matter how much checking you do in your scripting, there's always the edge case and the risk. Well, I mean, the outcome from that edge case is catastrophic, so it's not worth the risk, I think.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think I would ever have automation turn on a node for me, for example. Even maybe an RPC, definitely not a node. Even if I was like,
you can have it turn on a node, you just have to have it be a dumb disposable node, and then you just manually point your signers to it.
Yeah, sure. But I that's the thing. I wouldn't even turn on an RPC that was open to a signer without double checking the firewall, double checking I'd removed the keys were not the ones I thought. All of that, it's just not worth it.
Yeah.
If I was doing RPCs with like Ansible or something like that, I would probably have a script to set up the node and the firewall, and I would run everything through reverse proxy and then just check the caddy file or something like that. So, I mean, opening firewall ports is not a massive drama if you don't have to do it all the time. So as long as you run it all through your SSH port or something like that, and you have appropriate scripts that just adds to a caddy file and restarts caddy, I don't think there's a high risk or like a large footprint for it to add security issues. So
yeah, I'm not really worried about security issues so much as double signing. I mean, reverse. I would run a reverse proxy in front of an RPC, but just for all other purposes, I think you just open a port, don't you? I was gonna. So I noticed we had some comments as well. I just wanted to pull out a couple of So Rama had said a little bit earlier, there's lots of talk about difficulties in onboarding people in multiple areas. Is there a plan to address it? In a decentralized world, there is no one to take ownership. This is, yeah, it's pretty hard. Like the approach we're taking, like as in Envoys, Needlecast, I think is we're just going to proactively hire. We're just going to hire and train, and just we're just going to have to try and cover that salary by taking on more engineering work. Because it's chicken and egg, isn't it? Like especially with core dev and stuff like that, where like what I've seen with Cos and Wasm dev is that Cos and Wasm dev is very, very easy to sell to people. There's a lot of people who want to write Rust. There's a lot of people who understand the smart contract thing. There's a lot of people who, for whatever reason, see it as lower barrier to entry than chain dev. I think I'm not the only person. I know there is a movement about saying that lean Cosmos, where it's mainly just a base chain plus Cos and Wasm, is likely going to be the dominant paradigms for Cosmos moving forward. I mean, I personally go even further and say actually just IBC and then don't assume anything else about the stack is probably going to be the dominant paradigm eventually. Maybe Cos and Wasm will be part of that. Probably it will be. But it's interesting that it's very easy, it seems, to sell the smart contracts and Rust. It's much harder, and this is because the SDK is inherently more complicated to work with. Mm-hmm. But I think Go does play a role, and I've beaten that horse. So
they should have a really light version of the SDK, like you say, but I don't think it should include Cos and Wasm because there's a lot of attack surface on Cos and Wasm.
Oh yeah, no, but the way it's implemented so there isn't a Rust SDK, but the way IBC is implemented is it's just a library. It's a module. It's not a module. It's literally a Rust library. You can include it in any Rust project, and you have IBC, but it won't obviously work without all the other stuff. So it's up to you how you actually integrate that into your application. So that's why I think like if you had Cos and Wasm, as in essentially the bits, the X WASM that's in WASM-D as a similar Rust module, then you'd have IBC, Cos and Wasm. You can build them into any Rust project, and you already have Tendermint in Rust. So, I mean, that would be my bet for the future as like a much better way for onboarding. To answer your question, Rama, I know Larry, who's I think Mars Protocol, has also been saying a similar thing on Twitter, and I think he's a very smart guy, but confirmation bias, of course. And actually Rama made a second point, which is just saying I've seen the community openly shit on people for trying to get into roles or positions to assist Juno, as an example. So I guess this is a reply to that comment we had earlier saying, you know, should we make a DAO and then invite people to apply, right? So there are pitfalls maybe to that approach, I suppose.
I guess like, you know, with the sub DAOs, maybe there should be more of a effort to look to the broader community for people for those sub DAOs who are interested, rather than you know, people that are already tight to the community. Might be a good way to bring in additional, like network effects. Again, you bring in a couple of people, they've got friends who have got friends who've got friends. So then, you know, you can't get more interested than if you're on a DAO and focused on that. So yeah, I mean, that's all good points.
There's so much VC money flowing around now. I think it's a good balance to that too. Like, I mean, we talked about before around, you know, what the role of that VC is and the experience there and those types of things and quote unquote Web 2 and all this type of shit. But there's value in that. And there's value in trying to separate, you know, teams and approaches to figure out what the market will accept. And there's also value in maybe, you know, Juno sub-DAOs taking larger chances because they have the coins to do it. So I do think that there should be some accountability though. Like that idea around, you know, kind of building that DAO team and then understanding over a course of 6 months, what do they invest in and where those teams are and if that makes sense or not, and try to make this sense of like, are we getting an ROI? Because there should be, no matter what, there should be an ROI at a portfolio level, maybe not at an investment level, but at a portfolio level, I should look back and say, hey, we're making the right decisions here. Like, you know, going back to our point before around marketing the growth of the cosmos and those types of things, like that, it's important to be able to put money down and be able to see that we're seeing return off that. So, I don't know. Maybe it's a good balance between, kind of obviously the Juno DAO and also what's happening, externally. And there's a lot of change starting from a good amount of VC funding, and there's dollars coming in the cosmos, which is good stuff.
So completely unrelated.
Master
Earlier, my mouse stopped working too, so I can't click around. But so the phrase earlier, you were talking about your dark British comedy animation, and just the only thing I could think about while you're talking about was Douglas Denham.
What?
Oh,
Douglas.
from the IT crowd. Chris, you mean Chris Morris's character, or do you mean
Yeah, I think it's Chris Morris. Not the old Denham, the young Denham.
Oh yeah. What's his face? Who's Toast of London? Who's in Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, right?
Richard.
I don't
No,
know.
not Richard Ayoade. Matt Berry. Matt Berry.
Yeah.
It's so funny, man. I love that.
Father,
you computer man, fix my pants.
unhand me priest. Yeah.
Great. Even the
yeah.
old guy, he's just like so business.
He features very strongly in a very good video by the band Three Trap Tigers. They literally okay, two facts about Matt Berry. Number one, he's in the video Reset by Three Trap Tigers. They literally I think they sent him a message like, Matt, we have this insane idea for a video. Would you do it? He's just like, yeah, fine.
Fuck it.
Why not? Number two, he's in a band called Matt Berry and the Maypoles because he is a folk singer, and people go to his shows assuming that it's a joke. And it's a serious, dead serious, not a joke, folk band. He plays at folk festivals. And then some people go along and they're like,
it's cool.
Oh, right, I was expecting musical comedy. No,
right.
It's just a folk band playing folk standards.
It's like Steve Martin played the banjo. You're like, it's funny. And then you're like, oh shit, this guy's a really good banjo player. Like where the hell did that come from?
Yeah, there's also like, especially from the period like going way back like 15 or so years or so, the early 2000s, he whenever there was like, because he can I think play quite a few instruments, whenever there was like a random BBC sketch show where they just needed like a bit player to play like an old 70s prog guy or something, he always like, there's always lots of young Matt Berry just in like shades and a mustache or something playing one of these roles where it's just like, there's this amazing one, I can't remember what it is. I think Richard Ayoade might be in the sketch as well. I'll try and find it for the show notes, where there's he basically sat at this piano and they're talking to him. It's like supposed to be like one of those old prog rock guys from the 70s, and they're just like, what's the song about? And he talks about it's like really dark. It's like about his brother's suicide or something. And they're like, okay, well, it's kind of like the old Grey Whistle Test if you've seen that show. And so then he's I think it's Richard Ayoade potentially. He turns to the camera. He's like, so we're going to hear some of this. It might be a little bit disturbing, a bit moving, but it's obviously a very beautiful piece. Take it away. And like he obviously starts like playing this sad piano, and then he just sort of like kicks the piano over, and he's got like a keytar, and then he just starts like shredding, and it's just like nonsense 70s synth, and he just like rips his shirt and gets his chest out and stuff. And it's supposed to be this song about like his dead brother or whatever. And I was like, that is 70s prog. That is exactly, you've nailed it. But he wrote like all of those things. I think he basically, where they were just like, we need a musical skit. Here's our idea, and then they just got to go write the music and then be in it. So
mute. I've said my thing. Now I'm muting.
Matt Berry, mute.
I just looked up
Matt Berry in the... What's that? Sorry,
I just looked up Matt Berry and the Maypoles, and yeah, man, he's like playing in front of legit crowds. Like,
yes,
it's a real thing. Like it's actually his side. It's completely dead serious.
Cool.
He just looks so fucking cool too. Like,
I think he's probably quite a nice guy. Like I suspect he kind of seems like he's got his shit sorted.
He's got the coolest demeanor. He's just like, you computer man.
He's like, his background. I think he is actually like a voiceover artist. That's like his thing.
Oh, yeah.
Like, so periodically you'll hear something on the radio in the UK and it's just Matt Berry. Like, as in, before he was more well known, you would just hear like a radio advert when you were driving along in like your parents' car in the early 2000s or whatever. You'd be like, is that Matt Berry? Like,
do you have a shite car? buy a new one from New
Yeah,
Cars.
no, exactly. It would be like, have you had an accident in the last? And you're like, it's Matt Berry. This is definitely Matt
Totally
Berry.
him. Yeah.
And then like, but like, now he's like considerably more famous as like a comic actor and stuff. But he still does. I'm pretty certain either or he's got impersonators now. I don't know. Could be one or the other.
Impersonators? Yeah.
But he did a more recent show called Toast of London. If you've not seen it, which is all about he plays a struggling actor who's basically the most awful person in the world, and who this guy is also a voice actor, but is basically a failed stage actor at the end of his stage career, struggling to make ends meet. And it's sort of like a comedy dark version of his own life, where he's made like a version of himself if he was just a prick to everyone all the time. It's quite funny. Yeah, there's a few people in it who are like minor characters who have gone on to be quite famous in the standard style of all British comedy, it seems, where like the guy playing the T-boy in the studio is now famous because he was in that Star Trek Discovery, and
Right.
you're like, wait, that's the guy that was one of the main characters in Star Trek Discovery, and he's playing the T-boy that's always rude. Or like Ben
T-boy.
Whishaw. Did any of you see oh god, what's it called? Nathan Barley? That's a really old one. So
No.
in Nathan Barley, it's about startup culture in like Brick Lane in kind of Shoreditch, East London in like the early 2000s, and it hasn't aged a day. It's still perfect.
Is that the show name or is that the actor?
Nathan Barley's the name of the show. It's about this guy who runs a startup which does nothing but is well funded, and they just do fucking nothing, and they're just all hipsters, and everybody's horrible in it, and it's so pitch perfect as a satire. But in it, they have one of their employees who's paid to actually do all the work. I think he's the programmer that actually keeps the lights on.
Yeah.
Is Ben Whishaw, who went on to be like Q and stuff in James Bond. So who's like one of the biggest actors. Like most of these other people did like one or two other comedy shows after this and not much else. And in it, yeah, so Ben Whishaw is just like this guy who's in every episode, and they just prank him relentlessly. And you're like, that's Ben Whishaw. He's the guy. He's like this big Hollywood guy now. And the guy who wrote it, Charlie Brooker, is the guy that created Black Mirror.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So he was a comedy writer. He did a bunch of comedy shows like Chris Morris and people like that back in the day. And obviously Chris Morris wrote like Day to Day and stuff along with like Armando Iannucci and all those guys who did Alan Partridge. And
Nathan Barley's from 2005, so that's like early days. Yeah.
Whatever happened to the Mighty Boosh guy?
The Mighty Boosh, they did 3 series, didn't they? And then they stopped doing it.
Yeah, they stopped doing it. It was a good show.
I think they ran out of steam.
Toast of London, and I got rack of toast at my local cafe.
Yeah, we're gonna have to. So the show notes for this for this week are just going to be like loads and loads of British comedies, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It's just shit. It's fine.
But
somehow there's always 90 minutes of content related to the cosmos, even when there's no content.
well, it's back to Noel's reasoning that we basically have a voice call every week, so we may as well film the voice call. That's a podcast.
That's exactly
I mean, that
right.
is the whole purpose of this show, just to record our
That's
voice
fine.
call, provide entertainment to people.
Coinwater said something interesting there, which is double signing should be addressed in the core code. It is on my list to build, but have to launch our chain first. We're running 3 parallel nodes that represent a single node. Failover and uptime is paramount. We should not have to worry about slashing when pushing to do what is best for the chain. That's interesting, but I guess the question isn't like, is there? You don't want to guard against double signing because double signing is potentially the attempt to interrupt consensus with invalid state.
Tis.
Yeah, I think it should.
So if somebody's come up with, well, although actually, God, sorry to mention, but I think it works slightly different in Aptos, doesn't it? The old double signeroo, because it's all threshold.
I don't know, actually.
It's all threshold signing, isn't it?
I have
Hot
no idea. I've been watching a lot of videos around hot stuff and trying to understand the differences between that and Tendermint and kind of the benefits and whatever. But I double signed.
Is that what it's called?
It's called hot stuff. Yeah.
Hot stuff.
Hot stuff.
Hot stuff.
There's a good
That's
video.
the consensus engine.
Yeah,
That's
I'll
a
put it in
unique
the show
name
notes.
for
There's a
consensus engine.
yeah. I found a good video on A16Z discussion around that versus Tendermint and kind of the difference.
Did you find it, or did Polkachu send
You're
you
right.
it?
My bad. Credit where credit is due, as most things on this podcast.
This podcast is just
Is it?
like we're just telling the things that Polkachu has told us for the week.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
He's
you're
like
right.
he's like
We
he's
ever
like the
asked
puppet master.
Polkachu to come
I
on?
did find the second part of that video. Does that count?
Yeah.
Part two. All right.
We
Have you
talked
ever
about
asked him to come- Poco? He hasn't been on before, has he?
no, he doesn't
Never
like
seen him.
he doesn't like publicity.
Mm-mm.
No.
We were talked on a previous one of these with when Schulze was in about the Tim Roughgarden lectures about economic incentives,
Mhm.
which is a taught course in the I think optional course in computer science that he teaches wherever he is, Columbia. And the online course content became really popular, particularly with people in the crypto space. He's started doing a second series, which is all about consensus engines and different consensus schemes.
Mhm.
And his first deep dive series is on Tendermint.
Oh yeah.
So that's another interesting recommend. It's fucking long. I mean, it is courseware. So it is, here is a session with a virtual whiteboard. I'm going to tell you how partial BFT or asynchronous partial what's it called? BFT works. So it is heavy going, but it is interesting.
Is it publicly available?
Yeah, it's on
Oh, yeah?
YouTube.
We'll
I
put it
can
in the- we'll put it
I
in the
can
notes then.
I can send
Sure.
you a link.
Yeah.
Just go in my crazy YouTube history, which you can imagine is absolute
Yeah,
madness.
mine's full of it's garbage.
Mine's just Matt Berry and consensus algorithms. That's it.
Is it? Mine's like 8,000 1-hour comedy specials. Patrice O'Neill and everything else. Yeah, exactly.
There's an amazing. Have you ever seen that Instant Regret YouTube playlist? That's one of the best things on the internet, where it's just all these 10-second clips of completely incomprehensible memes that have been gradually added to over time. And it's like archaeology, some of it, because if you watch for more than like a few minutes, you'll be into memes from like 6 months ago, and you'll be like, whatever cultural event this references, I have no idea.
I don't know what's going on.
I did a search and I got the Instant Regret playlist 1 through 35, and that ended in 2021. So I'm guessing we're up to the 50s.
Yeah, you're looking for. There's like I think it's like Instant Regret playlist, Instant Regret clicking this playlist, something like that. And it's by Epic Donut Dude, if memory serves, on YouTube. But we once had a house party where we just put that. We didn't put any music. We just put on that, like on the sound system on the TV, and people kept walking into that room being like,
It's perfect.
and then you come back 30 minutes later and they were just stood there with their beer laughing, and you'd be like, well, the party's over for them. Like,
Was it Just a Regret or Mr. Karma? Which one was it?
Trying to find it.
Who's the user?
I think it
Mr.
was
Karma?
Epic. No, Epic Donut Dude.
Oh, Epic Donut Dude. Okay.
Yeah, obviously.
Obviously.
I mean, how could you?
How would you even?
Why would you
figure this out?
accept any substitutes? Unless Epic Donut Dude gave up the mantle. I have to admit, I've not watched it in a few years. So
113,000 subscribers, far more
Yeah.
than Game of Notes. So
I mean, I'm subscribed.
I clicked.
I'm gonna watch the shit out of that.
I'm sub.
So I had an idea for a bar 10 years ago. I wanted to open a bar that would just have on the walls like 1,000 5-inch screens that would only play like these types of videos, like over and over. Like each screen would have its own meme over and over and over, and you'd have thousands of them.
There used to be a bar that I used to go to that would just play Archer.
That's it. It's Archer over and over.
Just had Archer going in the back, like with subs. It was just
Perfect.
going in the background. They had like, I don't know, metal, and then just Archer playing on all the screens. It was weird.
That sounds kind of cool. Yeah.
okay.
But
Yeah,
also the first
exactly.
time I saw Archer and then went and looked it up and watched it all, and it's great.
Link in the show notes.
Yeah, anyway, so I mean, Kevin here has a nice comment. I love when Null gets catty. I don't know what that is in relation to, but
Is
yeah,
that
man.
every episode?
I get catty.
Yeah, maybe. Please never do that again. But yeah, no. Kevin, obviously, famously of the TDF.
See,
Stuff.
Kevin's the marketing guy that I need.
I know,
wish I
right?
had a Kevin.
I think
I wish I had a
Kevin. I
Kevin
think
for a
Kevin can do it. I think Kevin's marketing is probably the best out of any of us, isn't it?
By far.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Well,
yeah, by far.
with the pitches.
On point, I believe, is
yeah,
what
yeah.
the kids say. Is
Yep,
that what they say?
it's on point.
Definitely,
Yep.
definitely on point. Definitely great marketing. If I had a Kevin for a marketing guy, and a help tech guy, that'd be great. And
Yep.
if I had a Rama for a research guy,
Yeah.
that'd also be great. If
Yeah.
you're a Kevin or a Rama, reach out. Maybe we can talk.
I need a Kevin, a Rama, and a Frey for a developer. Then you're fucking
kind of
taking
a-
over this thing.
Strange
Yeah.
combination of roles that.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Kevin, you don't.
wouldn't-
Kevin,
I
by the
wouldn't
way,
hire
you
a Frey. He's like
don't
too
need to
busy.
respond to every single tweet.